So we are currently in the second section of Chapter 5 of Division E, entitled The Centers and the Rays. Last time we started our session with DK's statement, the Dragon of Wisdom, the Solar Logos, is in manifestation, and he brings into incarnation those cosmic entities who are in essence identical with himself, meaning the planetary logoi. Though planets, they are on the cosmic path, and they therefore are like brothers to the Solar Logos. I hope you all, by the way, had a great conference, enjoyed the conference. I know many of you here were attendees at the conference. It was a terrific conference. Next year it's going to be in person in Arizona. Now it's also going to be streamed, so if you live, in Slovakia or somewhere, you can still be a part of it. And during this webinar, I very much encourage you to ask questions and make comments about anything that's puzzling or of interest. Okay, so after this statement about the Dragon Wisdom, we have another important statement. After the third initiation, all human beings find themselves on their monadic ray, which DK goes on to tell us is one of the three major rays. We then learn that a Master of Wisdom needs to work through when a Master of Wisdom needs to work through one of the rays of attribute, rays 4 through 7, he does so through one of the subrays of the three major rays. His monadic ray is on one of the three major rays, and if he's called to demonstrate through one of the subrays, for instance, the fifth ray, then depending on which major ray he's on, then he activates, through an act of the will, he activates that subray, that particular subray, and is therefore able to function in that way. Next, we learned that when a master leaves the hierarchy of our planet to take up work elsewhere, it frequently necessitates a complete reorganization of the hierarchy and a fresh admission of members into the Great White Lodge. This reminds us that the Earth is in constant communion with the other planets in the solar system, and that there is a free exchange of personnel depending on the needs of all the planetary hierarchies. Thus, all monads are ultimately citizens of the solar system, irrespective of where they spent their time developing their lesser sheaths. Once one's monadic consciousness comes to the fore by becoming a Master of Wisdom, then you might be called on to serve in any one of the schemes of the solar system. It's a pretty amazing idea. We then learn that the soul ray is, quote, a direct reflection of the monad and is dependent upon that aspect of the spiritual triad, which for the man is at any particular time the line of least resistance. So this, introduced last time, and we missed a time, a somewhat obtuse teaching. So we have the ray of the monad, which reflects itself into the spiritual triad, but on a different ray. The ray of the spiritual triad is different than the monadic ray. Much like the personality vehicle is on a different ray than the soul that sends it forth, almost always. Then from this triadal ray, the causal body is formed using the same ray, thus linking the higher and lower expressions of the ego. So the ray of the causal body and the ray of the spiritual triad, we're told, are the same ray. Then we have a teaching that is not often discussed, quote, sometimes the ray will have for its center of force the atmic aspect, sometimes the buddhic, and at other times the manasic aspect. So you're talking about the soul ray here. The soul ray demonstrates either a triadal first, second, or third subray influence, thus emphasizing either the atmic, the buddhic, or the manasic aspects. The soul ray remains the same in each case, but emphasizes a particular line of energy, depending on the, quote, aspect of the spiritual triad, which for the man is at any particular time the line of least resistance. This suggests to me one's line of work, one's affiliations, and the particular, probably most importantly, the particular emphasis of a given incarnation, that even though the soul ray remains constant, it can change this sub-ray influence, from to be either atmic, buddhic, or manasic, which are forms of the first of the three aspects, right? And will, love, or intelligence. DK then gives us a list that shows the sub-ray choices available to the soul, which I translated into chart form here. And we got into it for quite a while last time, which is a month ago. So if you're interested in this, check out ToCF 40, which is the last webinar in this series. So you have here the monadic ray, then the ray of the spiritual triad, and then the soul ray, which demonstrates one of the three aspects of the spiritual triad. That's why you have these subrays, rays and subrays. So if the soul ray was the first ray, for instance, then it would, depending on the incarnation and the line of work, or that could also be ashramic affiliation, you would choose one of these three subrays, Atma, Buddhi, Manas, right? The same thing would be true if the soul is on the second ray. Then you would have the potential of Buddhi Atmic, which would be the first subray of the second ray, Buddhic Buddhic, or Buddhic Manasic. And then the same thing would hold with the Manasic ray. We then learned about what DK calls the third period. Remember, we've been talking about these periods for the last few sessions. The first period is concerned with personality development. It's also the whole first tier of petals of the egoic lotus that is developed during this period. The second period was soul contact, which is the second tier of petals of the egoic lotus. And then the third period, we here learn, comes into play at the third initiation, when the monadic ray makes itself felt on the physical plane. In other words, the personality has been so conditioned that it can literally express soul reality. It's soul infused, and it acts as a living soul on the physical plane. Though the shortest period from the perspective of the incarnated jiva, this third period is, quote, the period of comparative permanence when viewed from the plane of the monad. Once you break the chains of samsara, you no longer have to incarnate, then you move into a relatively permanent condition of working with your monad up till the sixth initiation, when you become one with your monad, much like you become one with your soul at the third initiation. So we'll start this session by rereading the passage that we ended with last time. Can we get a reader, please?
Yeah, before that, Anne Veronica asks, is the causal and is soul and causal body different?
The causal body is the vehicle of the soul. So yes, it is different. There's different expressions of the soul. The most direct expression for us, go back here to this chart, the most direct expression is the spiritual triad. That's the threefold aspect of the soul. That is then stepped down into the soul on the first three subplanes of the monastic plane. And it's there also that the causal body is built. But it's important to realize that the causal body is in the last analysis, a third aspect entity. That is to say, it's a form, right? And through which the soul and the personality come together over eons period of time, right? The soul influence is there through all one's experience within the causal body, right? Now, the trick is a question that I'm not fully able to answer is the causal body and the egoic lotus the same thing? Because basically, as I've seen it and read about it, they are. That the egoic lotus is how the causal body functions, right? So there's a gradual, you come to gradual awareness of soul influence during during that period where you unfold the 9 petals of the egoic lotus, which is also the time that you're storing light in the causal body. And Veronica, I saw your hand again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, but I have difficulty understanding these things, so I'm probably bringing you back. So you said that the causal body probably is the egoic lotus. Could we say that the soul is the jewel in the center?
Actually, that's more monadic. But, you know, it becomes...
Because I have difficulty putting the soul somewhere. The causal body is the egoic lotus, okay? The jewel is the monad. What is the soul? I understand it, the causal body is the third aspect, but it's also energies, it's also...
The soul
so what
is...
we say
okay.
the soul?
Yeah, the difference between the causal body and the soul is this. The soul is a great solar angel, a Manasaputra, that agreed to overshadow the new human being, you know, back in Lemurian times for many, either the moon chain Lemuria or Atlantis, but many in Lemurian times. And it contracted, you could say, to overshadow the animal man at that time. As soon as mind began to develop, which was in Lemurian times, and we're talking about instinctual mind at this level, then that animal man entered the fourth kingdom. The soul continues this relationship until the fourth initiation, when the indwelling jiva comes to the level of awareness that the soul provided, right? The way this is all done is through the causal body. the vehicle of the causal body. But it's a great solar being on its own plane, right? That lives in the heart of the sun, but almost all the information that we have about the soul is the soul in relation to the human being that it overshadows. It remains mysterious. There's no question about it. So
Uh, are we talking that the soul is in the Buddhic plane? The solar angels are on the Buddhic plane, aren't they?
the soul demonstrates through the Atma Buddhi Manas, so that would mean Atmic, Buddhic, and Manasic planes, and it anchors its consciousness in the causal body. But it itself, when disconnected or unconnected to a human being, is of a much greater level of consciousness that has to do with, actually has its life. It's a solar being. It lives within the heart of the sun on its own plane. But that's, in a way, is not, doesn't concern us, because it's the soul as we know it is its influence for us, in relationship with our process. It's not altogether satisfactory, is it? Uh,
I'm trying to grasp some of it, because I understand they project themselves. So there is a projection here of the solar angel from the heart of the sun, and I think this is the second projection.
yeah, so you have, if you, the closest you're going to get in this chart would be the soul ray, right? Which brings the ray of the spiritual triad into the uh, uh, influence through the ray of the causal body. And that way it's a kind of intermediary. And here's to just add to that difficulty in perception, is that we are essentially our souls, but rather than thinking of bringing that soul down to who we are here, the truth is that we live in, illusion, glamour, and Maya, and that keeps us from knowing what we actually are, right? Which is this soul. Yeah. Any other
Okay.
questions about this? Or
I was this table you've got here on the left, the spiritual triad. It does it change from life to life, showing
yeah.
the ethnic or the Buddhic or the monastic aspect.
Well, it would change according to DK in what we're just reading. It would change according to the emphasis needed for that particular incarnation. Soul remains the same, but that's the soul is capable of emphasizing one of the three subrays. Right? It's only going to be one of the three. It's not 9, because the soul is going to be on one of these three rays, right? First, second, or third. So first, but all of them, no matter which ray your soul is, are capable of emphasizing either an atmic, a buddhic, or a monastic emphasis for who knows how long. We're not told. It could be from life to life. For an initiate, I would think that for those of us who are working with to gain soul contact, that it would be continuous for a longer period of time.
May I ask you, saying only 1, 2, 3, we can have soul rays only 1, 2, 3, but we do have 4, 5, and 6, and 7.
Right, because this is
When you say
also,
soul, you mean the triad.
that's right. That's right.
Okay, that's where I got mixed up.
Yeah, and at a certain point, your soul does graduate onto one of the three higher rays.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you, Francis.
Yeah, you bet. I don't have a perfect understanding of this either, but this is what I've been able to piece together. So if, if any of you have any other thoughts about it, let me know. Okay, so let's do our reading. I see Tom's hand. Yeah, Tom? Are you muted?
Me?
There you go.
Yeah, I was just listening to Michael's presentation on glamour somewhere, 71, and he puts the relationship of solar angel, monad, and soul in quite beautifully order, which I cannot repeat here, but there's a good presentation of the relations, very clear.
Oh, that's good to know. And you have to remember that the soul is sent forth by the monad, at a certain point, when the time is ripe for that influence to come forth. So it's the real true self is the monad, and because it's one of those you can't get here from there kind of a thing. There has to be this intermediate station, so to speak, or intermediate level of consciousness, which that's what the soul performs. That duty, that agreement to send forth the personalities, and then under soul influence gradually draw that personality indwelling jiva, that imprisoned soul, up to its own level. And then DK says that the triple becomes dual, because then the soul infused personality, which is the liberated jiva, then sets up a relationship directly with the monad over the third, fourth, and fifth, and finally the sixth initiations, at which time the sixth initiate becomes one with the monad in the same way that the third becomes one with the soul. Well, thanks for that piece of information, Tom. It's good to know if somebody wants to dive into that commentary on initiation, human and solar. No, on glamour, a world problem. What was the particular episode? Okay, we'll go on. So, reader, please.
And Veronica, you want to read?
Okay. Therefore, we have A. Two triangles brought to vivification by the personality ray. Two triangles brought to vivification by the egoic ray. The synthesizing triangle of the monad. We must nevertheless recollect that the complexity is increased by the fact that the personality triangle will be brought to full activity according to the ray of the monad or the spirit. Therefore, no hard or fast rule can be laid down about development. The egoic triangles are dependent largely upon the reflection in the personality of the spiritual life force. They are the midway point, just as the causal or egoic body is the transmitting point, when sufficiently equipped and built, between the higher and the lower.
Thank you, Anne Veronica. Okay, so first up, therefore, we have A, two triangles brought to vivification by the personality ray, B, two triangles brought to vivification by the egoic ray, and C, the synthesizing triangle of the monad. Now, we've been talking about these triangles for many months now. If you remember, triangles 2 and 3, remember this stuff? Are vivified by the personality ray, thus bringing into development one's activity on the astral and mental planes. This is also the time that one develops the lower petals of the egoic lotus. triangles 4 and 5 are vivified by the egoic ray, producing a blending of the physical and mental kundalini fires. Could we get a reader? We've read this before, but I wanted to include it in review because it's a real good description of this stage, this fourth and fifth stage, which I believe many of us are at. It also is very much related to the fourth and fifth petals of the egoic lotus. So can we get a reader, please?
Gordon, did you want to read?
Okay. Period 4 marks the definite stimulation of the throat center. All the creative activity of the threefold man, physical, emotional, and mental, is turned upward in service, and his life begins occultly to sound. He is occultly productive. He manifests forth, and his sound goes out before him. This is an occult statement of fact definitely apparent to those who have the inner vision. Coordination between the centers becomes apparent. Rotation is intensified, and the centers themselves change in appearance, becoming unfolded, and the rotary movement becomes fourth dimensional, turning inward upon itself. The centers are then radiating nuclei of light, and the corresponding 4 lower head centers are equally alive.
Thank you. Okay. So this is about triangles 4 and 5, which we just looked at here, right? Triangle 6, the final triangle, represents the synthesizing influence of the monad. So 5 is 4 is personality, 5 is egoic ray, and 6 is the synthesizing influence of the monad, and of course, the monadic ray. And this, during this triangle, one is liberating from the lower quaternary at the fourth initiation. This final synthesis takes place through the agency of the 3 head centers and might be the clue to the meaning of the last phrase of the stanza 1, which reads, "Then the 2 triangles, the greater and the lesser, merge with one flame, which burneth up the whole." Doesn't that seem to fit the 2 triangles being 4 and 5, which merge through this synthesizing energy of triangle 6? You can see it here. So could the greater and lesser triangles be triangles 3 and 5? Right? The lesser triangle 3, that's the personality aspect. The greater triangle 5, the soul aspect, which are synthesized by the monadic ray influence of triangle 6, which, quote, burneth up the whole. Next up, we must nevertheless recollect that the complexity is increased by the fact that the personality triangle will be brought to full activity according to the ray of the monad or spirit. Therefore, no hard or fast rules can be laid down about development. We might hypothesize from the statement that the monadic ray determines which chakra holds the major position in each of the 2 personality triangles. For example, a second ray monad might give preeminence to the heart chakra in both these triangles, as well as determining which way the energy flows between these chakras. Whereas the third ray monad might place the throat and solar plexus chakras, that last is a guess, but certainly the throat chakras, in the key position. What's surprising here is that it's the monadic rather than the personality or soul rays that influence these two personality triangles, thus revealing the monad's fundamental influence long, long before there is any conscious awareness of this influence. Did I see a hand?
Yes. To say that the monad has a synthesizing force suggests a certain intelligence or being that is in active form. So I'm just trying to imagine what it would be that actually synthesizes that.
That's actually work.
Pardon?
Yeah, well, that's actually at work here. What's the nature of this energy? Well, it changes depending on the ray of the monad. There's actually a description in esoteric psychology. I think it's volume 2 that describes how the 3 different rays synthesize, and they're quite different. For instance, ray 2 expands its influence until all that is desired to be synthesized is brought within the theater, the realm of influence, and therefore it then brings it together. The 3rd ray is very specifically chooses those aspects that it wishes to synthesize and doesn't actually condition that which it wishes to synthesize. It chooses it, and then through interrelation, it does the work of synthesis. But synthesis as a rule is a second aspect, quality. The monad acts as the initiating will for this synthesis to take place. Okay, let's see. Okay, next up. Anybody else have any thoughts, questions? Okay. Next, the egoic triangles are dependent largely upon the reflection in the personality of the spiritual life force. Of course, that spiritual life force is going to be the means that the ego adjusts its influence in accordance with the monadic impact on the personality. For example, if, as before hypothesized, a second ray monad emphasizes the heart chakra and the 2 triangles representing the personality, this influence would in turn determine the emphasis of the 2 egoic triangles. I'm getting lost here. Yeah, so if the second ray monad emphasizes the heart chakra in the 2 personality triangles, that would in turn influence the ego's experience of or influence within the 2 egoic triangles. In this case, the monad sets the course, you could say, through its influence and the personality developing triangles, and the egoic ray follows suit. It's an interesting line of cause and effect, again underscoring the importance of the monadic ray in determining the vivification of these triangles. Okay, finally, they are the midway point, just as the causal or egoic body is the transmitting point when sufficiently equipped and built, between the higher and lower. So animation of the egoic triangles represents the midway point of the indwelling jiva's journey from form to spirit. And just like the causal body, act to transmit the vivifying influence of the ego into the lower three vehicles. You could say that the soul uses these triangles as a means of vivifying the three lower vehicles. Any thoughts or questions? All right, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Janet. Want to read?
Sure. The permanent atoms are enclosed within the periphery of the causal body, yet that relatively permanent body is built and enlarged, expanded, and wrought into a central receiving and transmitting station, using inadequate words to convey an occult idea by the direction of the centers and of the centers above all. Just as it was spiritual force or the will aspect that built the solar system, so it is the same force in the man that builds the causal body. By the bringing together of spirit and matter, father and mother, in the macrocosm and their union through the action of the will, the objective solar system or the sun was produced, that sun of desire, whose characteristic is love and whose nature is Buddhi or spiritual wisdom.
Thank you. I believe that was Janet. So first up, the permanent atoms are enclosed within the periphery of the causal body. So this shows the limitations of charts such as this one, which depicts the causal body on the third subplane of the mental plane, right? While at the same time depicting the three permanent atoms on the first subplanes of the mental, astral, and physical planes. So how can this be? As far as I know, there's nothing in the blue books that sheds light on this paradox. All I can say is that the first subplane matter on any of the planes represents a noumenal energy that then outwardly demonstrates on subplanes 2 through 6, right? So for instance, the astral permanent atom at this first subplane level acts as the matrix for the astral plane energy, but it doesn't actually take form until planes 2 through 6. It's a noumenal form of energy, very much connected with the first aspect and the first ray. So we might surmise the permanent atoms are not vibrationally conditioned by the form aspect of the 6 subplanes beneath it, and therefore could, and according to DK, are vibrationally resonating at the same level as the causal body. Any thoughts or questions about this? The teaching states that these 3 permanent atoms are within the causal body. And of course, it can also relate to the 3 tiers of petals that make up the causal body. Next, yet that relatively permanent body is built and enlarged, expanded and wrought into a central receiving and transmitting station, using inadequate words to convey an occult idea, by the direct action of the centers and of the centers above all. So, though the permanent atoms are within the periphery of the causal body, it is the, quote, direct action of the centers that transfers the qualities developed during incarnation into the causal body, and the record of this development into the permanent atoms. Next, just as it was spiritual force, or the will aspect, that built the solar system, so it is the same force in the man that builds the causal body. The centers are animated by monadic fire, and thus are inherently an expression of the will aspect. The greater the activity of the centers, the greater the transference of quality into the causal body. So during one's life, if one increases the activity of a particular center, it's that vibrational quality that is transferred into the causal body as a form of light and is stored in the permanent atoms. But we may assume that the process is reciprocal, with the centers also gaining stimulation from the causal body, ultimately impulsed by the monad. And finally, we have, by the bringing together of spirit and matter, father, mother, in the macrocosm, and their union through the action of the will, the objective solar system, or the sun, was produced. That sun of desire, whose characteristic is love and whose nature is buddhi, or spiritual wisdom. The will to be, described here, is the unitive force that brings spirit and matter together. The direct result of this union is the second aspect, sonship. And thus the sun is born and love shines forth. DK describes the sun's nature as spiritual wisdom, combination of the first and second aspects, thus confirming the statement, I and my Father are one. Any thoughts about this? Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Joe Garceau.
Yes, Mikhail. By the bringing together in microcosm of spirit and matter and their coherence by means of force or the spiritual will, that objective system, the causal body, is being produced. It is the product of transmuted desire, whose characteristic, when fully demonstrated, will be love, the expression eventually on the physical plane of buddhi. The causal body is but the sheath of the ego. The solar system is but the sheath of the sun. In both the greater and the lesser systems, force centers exist which are productive of objectivity. The centers in the human being are reflections in the three worlds of those higher force centers.
Okay, there's a lot here, and hopefully it explains some of the questions we've had. So first, by the bringing together in the microcosm of spirit and matter and their coherence by means of force or the spiritual will, that objective system, the causal body, is being produced. So it's an ongoing process. It's not just that it was produced, it is continuously being produced, right? We know that the causal body is a focal point where soul and personality meet, and which grows in spiritual content through increased activity of the chakras. But it is the force of coherence from the spiritual will in combination with the matter aspect that actually builds or creates the causal body. Next, the causal body, is the product of transmuted desire, whose characteristic, when fully demonstrated, will be love, the expression eventually on the physical plane of buddhi. So, in the microcosm and on the evolutionary cycle, the force of coherence demonstrates as transmutation of desire into love. Desire binds us to the personality. Love draws us towards the soul. When this is perfectly expressed, the quality of buddhi reveals itself through the physical plane personality. Next, the causal body is but the sheath of the ego. The solar system is but the sheath of the sun, S-O-N. The causal body, or sheath of the ego, is built of matter from the third mental subplane, whereas the unsheathed soul expresses itself through the spiritual triad. To get a true definition of a solar system, we'll turn to page 3 and 4 of a treatise on cosmic fire. Quote, each solar system is the manifestation of the energy and life of a great cosmic existence, whom we call, for lack of a better term, a solar logos. And here's the relevant part. The solar logos incarnates or comes into manifestation through the medium of a solar system. This pretty clearly defines the S-O-N, sun, as the solar logos, who, as does the soul, mediates between spirit and matter. Finally, in both the greater and lesser systems, force centers exist which are productive of objectivity. The centers in the human being are reflections in the three worlds of those higher force centers. So very much as above, so below analogy holding here. Physical objectivity for the human being depends upon the etheric force centers of the mental, astral, and physical sheaths. Physical objectivity for the solar system depends upon the etheric centers found on the cosmic physical etheric subplanes of the cosmic physical plane. Okay, anybody have any thoughts or questions? All right, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Kirsten, do you want to read?
Yes. Before taking up the subject of Kundalini and the centers, it would be well to extend the information given above from its prime significance for man as that which concerns himself, to the solar system, the macrocosm, and to the cosmos. What can be predicted of the microcosm is naturally true of the macrocosm and of the cosmos. It will not be possible to give the systemic triangles, for the information would have to be so blinded that, except for those who have occult knowledge and the intuition developed, it would be practically useless intellectually. But certain things may be pointed out in this connection that may be of interest.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to take this as a whole. DK continues with his as above, so below comparative method. So to know those solar logoic triangles that are equivalent to the human triangles, we would first need to know which planets represent which centers. Unfortunately, most of the solar logoic centers are not given, but we are told that Venus is the logoic center, is a logoic heart center, and that Saturn is the logoic throat center. As to our Earth, DK says One of the mysteries revealed at initiation is that of the logoic center which our scheme represents, and the type of electrical fire which is flowing through it. In other words, he doesn't tell us, but there's some indication that at least that in potential, the Earth is the base of the spine center in the solar logos, and that could just be for a period or a certain cycle of the solar logoic life. The other piece of info that we would need to know to determine which logoic triangle is currently active is the solar logos's current stage of evolution. DK tells us the solar logos has for objective 9 initiations, the third cosmic initiation being his goal. We can thus assume, though it's not absolute, that he has taken the second cosmic initiation and is preparing for the third. The active triangle for a human being who is preparing for let's say it again. Active triangle for a human being who is preparing for or has taken the second initiation involves the heart, throat, and 7 head centers. If as above, so below holds in this case, and that's a big if, we already have 2 of the planets of the triangle, Venus for the heart and Saturn for the throat center. We just need to know which planet represents the 7 head centers. First ray Vulcan is a possible candidate, but we can't discount the possibility of Uranus with its first ray monad. Also, it's the final synthesizing planet, and the centers are always synthesized in the head center. Of course, this is all purely speculative. But, some of the writings that are coming up tend to actually foster this idea that the solar logos is on its own level working in this fifth triangle position. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Maria Cristina.
The solar system. We might briefly look at this from the standpoint of the centers of the heavenly men and of the grand man of the heavens, the logos. A, the heavenly men. The heavenly men in themselves embody centers just as does a human being, and on their own plane, these centers of force can be found. Again, we need to recollect that these centers of force on cosmic levels and in manifestation in the objective system demonstrate as the great force centers of which any particular group of adepts and their pupils are the exponents. Every group of masters and all the humans incarnate or discarnate who are held within the periphery of their consciousness are centers of force of some particular kind or quality.
Thank you, Maria Cristina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so first up, the solar system. We might briefly look at this from the standpoint of the centers of the heavenly men and of the grand man of the heavens, the logos. So the centers in a heavenly man are chains. The centers in a solar logos are planetary schemes. Next, the heavenly men. The heavenly men in themselves embody centers just as does a human being. And on their own plane, these centers of force can be found. It makes sense that the planets are centers in a solar logos, but we normally think of chains in terms of an unfolding sequence during which the life wave progresses from one globe to the next by means of the 7 rounds. And this is true within the realm of time and space. But from the perspective of the consciousness of the planetary logos, all 7 chains coexist, as shown in this illustration of the Earth scheme. And just as with the centers of a human being, these planetary centers unfold in sequence, but they are already in existence. A fascinating detail about these chains is that they are named after the planets, suggesting that just as with the chakras in our solar logos, planetary energy defines the quality of a chain. DK gives almost nothing on the specific nature of the Earth chains. Get a little bit about the Venus chain, but not much about any of them. But we might wonder if there is a correlation between the planets, representing certain chakras in the solar logos, and the chains that carry the energy of those planets as chakras in a heavenly man. For example, is the Venus chain the heart center of the Earth scheme, just as the Venus scheme is the heart center in the solar logos? Or alternatively, is it the ray makeup of a planet that determines which planetary chain energy is its heart center? The other factor that comes in here in determining this is their number and the order in which they unfold. You know, it's hard to imagine, for instance, that the heart center would demonstrate through the first chain, but these are concepts way beyond my pay grade. And since we're asking unanswerable questions, here's a couple of more. In our Earth scheme, why does Neptunian energy govern the first chain and Jupiterian energy the last chain? Another question. Notice I'm not answering these questions. Do the chain numbers have anything to do with the position of the chakras of the Earth scheme? For example, does Jupiterian energy, which rules the 7th chain, characterize the Earth's head center? After all, the Earth does have a second-ray soul. Another point, at the advent of each new chain, there are 7 new globes, making a total of 7 times 7 or 49 total globes in a scheme. But apparently each new set of 7 planets or globes continues to carry the energetic quality of the original or archetypal 7 globes. We see this illustrated here, where Mercury can be found characterizing the energy of the 5th globe of both chains 2 and 4. It's literally a different globe, substantively. It's a completely remade globe. In fact, there's an intervening chain here where there was yet another Mercury globe, right? And yet it still holds the quality that of this Mercurian quality, I'll say, because it's still the 5th globe of these 2 chains. And then finally, becoming the central globe of chain 5, which is, of course, the Mercury chain. Certainly it's no coincidence that Mercury becomes the central planet or the central globe of the 5th chain, at which time monastic development will reach its culmination. Yes, Nisa.
Oh, just to stir the pot, what was coming to mind was when he was talking about saying whenever you see a symbol, to think of it in motion. I'm sorry, just as when I
Uh-huh.
look at these symbols, I'm thinking, okay, if these are, the motion of it is kind of like beyond my ability to pull the thread there, but
Right. So yeah, the idea being that when we see a fixed symbol, we're only getting part of the story here, that the full impact of the symbol comes through, in part at least, through its motion. Is that what you're suggesting?
I don't know what I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying
Okay.
that's what came to mind was,
Okay.
as he says, well, whenever you see a symbol, remember all of these things are in motion, and so that's it.
Yeah,
Just
but
yeah.
that could relate to this, that the if you look at there is certainly a symbol for the energy of Mercury. We have it as the caduceus, for instance, which the symbol itself depicts a kind of motion, right, with its intertwined snakes around the central pole, and it suggests a movement up from from an earlier cycle at the base to the globe often, or an eagle, or at the top. I think HPB depicts it at one point as a three-headed bird at the top. But couldn't you see that the progression of these globes through chains 2, 4, and 5 could fulfill that symbol? Could represent the different stages of demonstration of that symbol. Good thought. Thanks, Nisa. Anyone else? Okay.
Well, there's just a comment
Yeah.
question from Janet saying, is this an example of group work of a higher order or high order?
Always. Yeah. Always. Yeah. Definitely, wherever there's spiritual influence that impacts matter, then you're looking at a group. You're looking at group work. You're looking at the intent of some great being being brought into form through some particular group. I saw another hand.
It's me.
And Joe.
I'm just counting triangles, and I have no proposition to make here, but I noticed that the second chain has at least 7, possibly 9 triangles in it. And I glanced over at the fifth chain, and it has numerous triangles as well, and I haven't counted them. Basically, in an overall picture, I'm seeing that each scheme, or I use the wrong term, globe.
Each chain, each one of these
Each
is a
chain
chain.
has got a different relationship inside.
Yeah, absolutely.
Tremendous.
Mammothly so. And we get a peek as to what those relationships are through the the name of the chain. For instance, here you have a 5-pointed star, but with a dropped fourth, which is the characteristic symbol, you could say, to go back to what Nisa was saying, of this chain. And it's appropriate, if you've seen the way that Venus tracks through the heavens when seen from Earth, it is a 5-pointed pattern, right? And so here you have the fourth chain, and what do you have? A square, right? With the 3 within and the 4 outer. Well, that is very much the esoteric and exoteric demonstration that happens at the fourth chain. The fifth chain of Mercury, I'm only just now considering this. It's not as straightforward, is it? You have a diamond shape that uh, that is overlaid an elongated triangle, right? A combination of 4 and 3 making this up. So, I won't even attempt that. I'm not prepared to, but you're absolutely right. They're very distinct. Each of these patterns is distinct, and I explore some of these triangles. So stay tuned.
One more comment. As an astrologer, I can feel the vibration of the separate planets. Looking at these diagrams, I haven't figured out, in effect, there's a whole line of consideration to look at the vibration for each planet, depending on what's going on inside with the 7 subparts.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. It's part of the pool of information about each planet. Absolutely.
Next life.
Right. There you go. Well, if you can do that in your next life, you're doing real well. Okay, so to pick up on my commentary, from this we might hypothesize that Mercury is also the 5th globe. Let's see, let me back up just a little bit. Certainly there's no coincidence. Mercury is a central planet here, this 5th planet. Yeah. From this, we might hypothesize that Mercury is also the 5th globe in the 4 Earth scheme chains. Stay with me here, right? The Earth scheme has 7 chains, and of the 4 Earth chains shown here in white, wherein the globes are unnumbered and Mercury is not indicated, right? What I'm saying is that that Mercury, we might hypothesize, is still the 5th globe in these unnumbered and unnamed chains. The only other named globes are Venus, shown as the 2nd globe of the Earth chain, the only indication, and the Earth, shown as the 4th globe of the Earth chain. We might hypothesize from the fact that Mercury is shown as the 5th globe in 3 of the chains that Venus, Earth, and Mercury are always the 2nd, 4th, and 5th globes in all the 7 Earth chains. Do we know this for sure? Of course not. But, it's a hypothesis, a working hypothesis. One last point. These 3 named globes, Venus, Earth, and Mercury, also have a chain named after them. So this is all kind of detective work, right? So we might hypothesize that the 4 other chain names, Neptune, Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, are also the names of the 4 globes that remained unnamed in each chain, thus excluding, you see what I'm saying here? The fact that he used these names, even though they don't ever appear as globe names, suggests, especially since Venus shows up, Mercury shows up, and Earth shows up as globes, it suggests that these are the other planets that are being described: Neptune, Saturn, Mars, and Jupiter, even though we're not given those names, right? So this leaves out Vulcan, Uranus, and Pluto as possible globe names. Furthermore, since there is a matchup between the names of the 2nd globe and the 2nd chain, right? They're both, Venus holds the number 2 position in both situations, right? The 4th globe and the 4th chain, which is the Earth in both cases, and between the 5th globe and the 5th chain, which is Mercury in both cases, we might hypothesize that the globe numbers in these chains in which the globes are numbered correspond to the chain numbers, thus giving us Neptune as globe 1 in each of the chains. You see where I'm going here? We're using the chain numbers to determine the number of the globe in each chain. So Neptune is globe 1 in each of the chains, Saturn as globe 3 in each of the chains, and Jupiter as globe 7 in each of the chains, taking that from the number of the chain. Because where we are given the names, they do coincide. That's in the case of, Venus, the Earth, and Mercury. I know all this is a mouthful, but it serves to illustrate the nature of a partial blind, wherein just enough info is given that allows us to fill in the blanks. But even though we may now know the names of the globes of each chain, the position of the globes in those chains wherein the globes remain both unnumbered and unnamed remains a complete mystery. This is all, of course, by design. It's known, when DK gets out this material, it's known what can be figured out and what can't. And when all you're given is the configuration, and frankly, I think that we're only given the configuration in the 3rd and 6th chain, that this is totally generic, 1st and 7th, totally generic. We're not even given the symbol, you might say, or the configuration, right? See. Yeah. So even though we may know the names of the globes of each chain, the position of the globes in those chains when the globes remain both unnumbered and unnamed remains a mystery. So what can we do with this hypothetical information? Not much with the unnamed and unnumbered chains, but actually quite a bit with the 3 chains wherein the globes are numbered and partially named. We'll explore just one configuration, the lines of energy that impact the Venus chain. First of all, note that globe 7, which we've determined is the globe expressing the Jupiterian stream, stands at the center of the Venus chain, suggesting that this Jupiterian stream represents the synthesizing energy for the 2nd chain. An appropriate assumption given the fact that there is a numerical matchup between the 2nd chain and Jupiter's 2nd ray. A strong argument also for Jupiter being this central planet 7 of the Venus chain. Now notice that the only globe in this Venus chain directly connected to this central Jupiterian point is the Mercury globe, which also connects with the Mercury globe, which also directly connects with the Mercury globe at the central point of the Mercury chain. See here? So here's this Mercury globe of the 2nd chain of Venus acts as a link between the central globe, and that's the only link there. It's the only place that is linked within the chain, and across to the Mercury chain, where it stands in the central position. It's almost like there's a form of energy streaming from this 5th chain into the center via the Mercury globe to the center of the Venus chain. And of course, there's many comments about the strong connection between Venus and Jupiter. Now notice that the only globe in this Venus chain directly connected to the, wait a minute. Okay, there's also a connecting line linking the central synthesizing Jupiterian globe of the Venus chain to the center of the Jupiter chain. And finally, completing the configuration, we have a dotted line connecting the central point of the Jupiter chain with the Mercury globe at the center point of the Mercury chain, thus having a fourfold connection here. This all takes place within the Earth scheme, right? But we also have at least an indirect connection between the Jupiter globe at the center of the Venus, which is really the very center of what we're talking about here, at the center of the Venus chain, with the Mercury scheme itself, right? This bow and arrow-like configuration, which emphasizes the Mercury-Jupiter-Venus connection, is just one of many of that could be determined and its implication then considered. For example, what stands at the highly connected central point of the scheme? What does that represent? It seems like it would have to be a point of synthesis, the point in the of reception and emanation, the point in the center of the circle, possibly representing the planetary logos itself. We're talking about this central point. In this regard, it's interesting to note that there is a line of direct connection with 5 schemes: the Mars, Venus, Vulcan, Jupiter, and Mercury schemes. Here we have Mars, Venus, Jupiter, Mercury, and Vulcan schemes. Which represents all the inner planets plus Jupiter. But we also have a single additional unnamed line of connection, the only one that directly connects an Earth chain to a point beyond the scheme. All the other chain connections are within the scheme. This is the only chain connection that extends outwards to another scheme altogether. All the other lines of connection to schemes converge at this midway point. So where does this line go? We get a tantalizing hint in the line that goes from the central point of our scheme to the Venus scheme. For when these two lines are extended, they cross at a point where, if this chart were to include the schemes, we might find the center point of the Venus scheme, thus illustrating the unique connection between the Venus chain of our Earth scheme and the Venus scheme itself. A number of quotes from later in TCF confirm this connection. Can we get a reader for this one, please?
Yeah. Nisa, you want to read?
There you go. Within the solar system, there's an interesting correspondence to this cosmic interplay in the relation between the Venus scheme, our Earth scheme, and the Venus chain in our scheme. Curiously enough, it will be through a comprehension of the human Antakarana, or the path which links the higher and lower mind, and which is constructed by the thinker during the process of evolution, that light on this abstruse matter will come.
Thank you, Nisa. And finally, this quote tells us how Sanat Kumara made his way to our planet. Can we get a reader, please?
Scott, do you want to read?
Okay. The statement that the great Kumara, or the one initiator, came to this planet from Venus is true, insofar as it embodies the fact that he came to this dense planet, the fourth, in the fourth chain, from that chain in our scheme, which is called the Venus chain, and which is the second chain. He came via the second globe in our chain.
Yeah, so you see this mapped out. The link between the second chain and the fourth chain is this line, which comes from the sixth globe, interestingly enough, to the second globe, right? Of course, there's indirect links between the two through the center point, but the only direct line of connection, interestingly, is from globe 6 of the second chain to the second globe of the Venus chain, which he describes as being how he came in, right? And then from that to our Earth globe. That's the path of Sanat Kumara. Okay, I know this is a little bit of a detour, but it does talk about the chakras within our Earth scheme, which are these chains, not to forget, and how they interrelate. There's whenever you're looking at something like this, it's way, almost all of it's speculation. You get these few jewel-like comments to where you try to piece together what's going on, but for the most part, you're left into the dark as to the specific ways in which, for instance, the chains of the Earth scheme interconnect. But we do know that they're chakras. We have their numbers. We have their constituent globes, but even though only hypothetically. And so, it's a huge research project, to try to put as much information together using the given quotes available in the blue books to to come up with some ideas about this. Okay. So, any thoughts or questions about this little exploration?
Well,
And I just touched on it. And so if you go back to for instance, this is just I just explored one set of connections, very much focusing on the Venus chain because we get more information about the Venus chain than many of them. But there probably are other, having to do with the Mercury chain and the Earth chain that one could explore. And, having charting these connections is one thing. Determining their possible meaning is something else, right? And of course, that's ultimately what we're looking for, right? Okay, that takes us, did I see a hand?
Yes, you do. I don't remember hearing you emphasize that in some of these pictures, 3 of the planets within, or the schemes within, are larger than the others.
Right, yeah. You're what you're trying to say is globes within a chain. And they're, yeah, let me go back to this one, for instance. You can see that these are the 3 chains where we have the most information. Well, really, where we have pretty much any information. And it's from this that we derive all the rest of the possible hypotheses, right? And you do see, as Jill was pointing out, that I think most notably here that Mercury is a much larger planet at the center. And you say, well, that's just because it's at the center, right? Well, no, because the seventh globe, which we've assigned to Jupiter here, is not larger. He could have, this chart maker could have easily made this as large as this Mercury central position, but he didn't, So I think these sizes have a very definite, are very definite in their indications. One thing we could do with this, because here we have 3, is we have the esoteric 3 and the exoteric 4. That works on both this 4th chain, where you have the 3 in the middle and the 4 exoteric on the periphery. And then you also have that here, where you have 4, 5, and 7 making up this equilateral triangle, and then a diamond shape of 1, 2, 3, and 6 making up, what possibly is the exoteric globes of that. Pure speculation, but this is what you do, and then you look for possible interrelated patterns that will give further credence to your speculation, to your hypothesis, right? It's certainly no accident that some are larger. What does it mean? Well, he doesn't tell us, because there's no, what do they call it with a map? Guide, anyway, to tell you what everything means, right? You're left on your own, figure it out. But it's really a tantalizing exploration. Anybody else? All right. Well, that's a good spot to stop.